I woke up to the sound of soft piano music, laughter, and the faint scent of vanilla cupcakes drifting through my window. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe some weird leftover memory from a war movie or a nightmare about clowns. But then I heard it. A woman giggling, followed by the unmistakable sound of a champagne cork popping. And that's when I sat up, fast. Still in my flannel pajama pants and with bed hair that could frighten livestock, I stumbled toward the window. I blinked once, then twice. What I saw stopped me cold. Rows of white chairs, a massive floral arch, waiters in tuxedos, a string quartet playing near my pond, my land, my backyard, my farm, transformed overnight into a high-end wedding venue. "What the hell?" I whispered, my throat dry with disbelief. I stormed downstairs, threw on my boots, and yanked open the front door. The warm breeze hit me like a slap, along with the scent of fresh flowers and roasted duck. I didn't care about any of that. All I could see was a banner strung across the trees. "Welcome to the wedding of Ashley and Brian." I had never heard of either of them. Before I could demand answers, a familiar voice chimed behind me. Sweet, fake, and as polished as a mannequin at a luxury store. "Good morning, Ethan." I turned slowly. There she was, Madeline Stone, president of the local HOA, queen of passive-aggressive newsletters, the woman who once tried to fine me because my rooster crowed before 6 a.m. She wore a pastel blue dress and heels that sank slightly into my grass as she waved a clipboard like it was a royal scepter. "Isn't it just beautiful?" she beamed. "The community will love this." "Madeline," I said through clenched teeth, "what in God's name is this?" She laughed lightly, as if I had just asked her what color the sky was. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Ethan. It's just a small wedding. We needed the perfect rustic venue, and your yard was simply ideal." "My yard?" I repeated. "This is my private property. You can't just throw a wedding here without permission." "Oh, come on. It's for the community," she said, flipping through her clipboard with theatrical flair. "Besides, you didn't answer your phone. Because you didn't call me." She shrugged like it didn't matter. Technicalities. Before I could reply, a woman with platinum blonde curls and an expensive smile walked up, followed by a man in a too-white suit that probably cost more than my truck. "You must be Ethan," the bride said, smiling brightly. "Thank you so much for letting us use your land. It's breathtaking." "I didn't let anyone use anything," I snapped. "Madeline set this up without asking." The groom laughed, that smug kind of laugh that made me want to throw hay at his face. "Relax, man. No harm done, right? It's just one day. Besides, we already paid for everything." "Paid?" I narrowed my eyes. "To who?" "To the HOA, of course," Madeline piped in. "A very reasonable community event fee." I stared at her. For a second, I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. She had not only commandeered my land, but made money off of it? "Oh, and the catering trucks couldn't park out front," she added. "So, we had them use your driveway. Hope that's not an issue." I turned slowly. My driveway was jammed with limousines, vans, and delivery trucks. No way I could even back my truck out if there was a fire. My jaw clenched. My fists balled at my sides. Then, something in me went very, very still. I took a step toward Madeline and said quietly, so only she could hear, "Move it, all of it, now!" She blinked at me like I was being unreasonable. "Ethan, don't be childish. The ceremony starts in an hour. Just go inside and relax. It'll be over before you know it." I smiled. Not kindly. "Madeline," I said softly, "you really should have picked another yard." She turned away, already walking off to greet more guests like she was hosting the Met Gala. The bride and groom returned to their pre-ceremony rituals, blissfully unaware they were trespassing on a land owned by a man who once trained attack dogs for the military. I pulled out my phone and called someone I trusted. "Open the back gate," I said when he picked up. "All of them?" my farmhand asked, half laughing. I glanced at the white tent in the distance, at the gourmet buffet, at the tuxedos shining in the sun, at the smug, oblivious couple. "Every single one," I said. "Got it, boss." I slid the phone back in my pocket and walked to the buffet table. I picked up a shrimp skewer, took a bite, and leaned on the table. If they wanted a countryside wedding on my farm, well, they were about to get the full farm experience. To be continued. Ethan stood beside the buffet table, chewing slowly on a shrimp skewer, watching the crowd with the quiet focus of a man about to set a trap. Madeline wove through the growing sea of guests like a self-declared queen, soaking in compliments, pointing out floral arrangements she had nothing to do with, and pretending the land beneath her heels was hers by birthright. The bride and groom, Ashley and Brian, were busy taking pre-wedding photos in front of Ethan's barn, laughing without a care in the world. They looked perfect. Too perfect. A woman in a $5,000 dress and a man with a Rolex that screamed, "Trust fund baby." Neither of them had any clue that the ground they were standing on was borrowed, and that payment was coming due. A distant, dull thud echoed from the rear of the property. Then another. Guests glanced around. A waiter looked toward the barn and froze. He pointed, mouth falling open. Ethan didn't even blink. Show time. The gate creaked, and chaos was unleashed. A dozen cows barreled through the open back gate like furry tanks on a mission. Their hooves thundered across the grass, tails flicking, eyes wide with excitement at their unexpected freedom. One particularly hefty steer trampled straight through the aisle of neatly arranged white chairs, turning them into modern art. But the real star of the show was Diesel, a jet-black bull with a twisted horn and an unshakable grudge against anything frosted. He set his sights on the 4-tier wedding cake with laser focus. "No!" a caterer shouted. Too late. Diesel lowered his head and charged, smashing the cake into a mountain of frosting rubble. Pink roses flew. Guests screamed. A woman in stilettos tripped backward into a decorative fountain. Somewhere, a champagne glass shattered. Ethan wiped his fingers with a napkin, still chewing, completely unbothered. "Did you do this?" Madeline shrieked, storming toward him like a hurricane in heels. He looked up, feigning innocence. "Looks like the cows didn't get their wedding invitation." Her face twisted. "You're going to regret this, Ethan." But he was already turning away, as a new threat emerged on the battlefield. Goats. 3 of them. Small, scrappy, and full of reckless joy. One jumped onto the gift table and headbutted a silver-wrapped box straight into the punch bowl. Another nibbled the edge of the guest book, then bolted off with the pen in its mouth. The third one climbed the DJ's table and began tap dancing across the sound system, distorting the classical music into a warped mess of violins and glitching bass. The guests scattered. Some climbed onto chairs, others tripped over hay. One man yelled, "My shoes are Italian," just before stepping directly into a steaming pile of cow dung. And then came the goose. Captain Snaps strutted out from the barn with a wide wingspan, flaring like a conquering general. His beady eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on the groom, Brian. It was war. With a mighty honk that made a baby cry somewhere near the buffet, Captain Snaps launched himself beak first at Brian's leg. "What the? Get off me!" Brian screamed, hopping backward as the goose nipped his calf. Ashley tried to pull the bird away, but Snaps whipped around and pecked at the train of her dress, leaving a trail of tiny holes in the silk. Her screams joined the growing chorus of chaos echoing across the property. From the porch, Ethan crossed his arms and simply enjoyed the view. It was better than any reality TV he'd ever watched. Madeline, face flushed and voice rising, yelled over the mayhem. "Call them off! You sabotaged this!" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're the ones trespassing." More guests began fleeing, tripping over knocked-over tables. The bridesmaids huddled behind the catering station, one of them crying because a goat had chewed off the hem of her designer dress. An elderly man tried to block Captain Snaps with a serving tray. It did not go well. And Ashley, now with ruined hair, a stained dress, and frosting in her earrings, sank to her knees. "My wedding is ruined," she sobbed. Brian, feathers stuck to his tux jacket, glared at Madeline. "Whose idea was this, huh? You said it was taken care of." "It was!" Madeline snapped. "It's just, this is sabotage." "No," Ethan interjected smoothly. "This is justice." A loud crash cut the argument. One of the cows had wandered too close to the champagne tower. It was now a shattered puddle of glass and booze. Madeline lost it. I'm calling the police. Ethan gave her a slow clap. Please do. I'd love to hear you explain why you're making money off a wedding on land you don't own. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then, the sirens. 2 patrol cars rolled up, tires crunching on gravel. Madeline nearly cried with relief. Officers! Arrest him! He set his animals on us! The cops surveyed the chaos. One took notes. The other looked at Ethan. Sir, is this your property? Ethan nodded calmly. Every inch of it. Did you authorize this event? Absolutely not. The officer turned to Madeline. Ma'am, did you collect payment for an event on land that doesn't belong to you? I didn't know. We have receipts, said Ashley's father, stepping forward and holding up his phone. Over 20 grand. The officers exchanged a glance. One muttered something into his radio. Ma'am, the lead officer said, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Madeline's face went white. What? No, I was trying to help the community. Tell that to the judge, Ethan said with a smirk. As they escorted her toward the patrol car, her designer heels sinking into the now muddy grass, she twisted around to scream, You haven't seen the last of me. Ethan waved. God, I hope not. My goose is getting bored. As the police drove off with a furious, frosting-stained HOA president in custody, Ethan turned back toward his house. The cows grazed peacefully. The goats chewed happily. Captain Snaps fluffed his feathers in triumph. And the wedding? It was over before it even began. The sun rose over Ethan's farm with the kind of quiet he used to take for granted. After the wedding disaster, the chaos, the frosting-covered guests, and Madeline being carted away by police, he had hoped for a few days of peace. But peace, apparently, was not on the menu. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Again. And again. Groaning, Ethan reached over and answered. Boss, said his farmhand, half amused, half annoyed. You might want to step outside. We've got visitors. Ethan swung his legs off the bed, pulled on his jeans, and headed to the front porch with a mug of half-warmed coffee. What he saw made his stomach twist. Not with fear, but with a familiar burning irritation. A Silver City inspection vehicle was parked by his fence. 2 men stood near it, shirts tucked, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning the property like they were about to discover a buried nuclear silo. And next to them, arms folded and chin lifted with smug delight, was the devil herself, Madeline Stone. Ethan took a long sip of his coffee and strolled toward the group. Morning, gentlemen, he said casually. Something I can help you with? The older of the 2 inspectors stepped forward, polite but firm. Mr. Ethan Miller, we received multiple complaints regarding your property. We're here to conduct a full zoning and code compliance inspection. Ethan's brows lifted. Complaints? He looked to Madeline. Let me guess. Madeline clasped a manila folder to her chest like it was the Ark of the Covenant. This isn't personal, Ethan, she said sweetly. Several community members have voiced concerns about your livestock, noise levels, sanitation, and the legality of your agricultural setup. Ethan tilted his head. That's interesting. I've owned and operated this land for over a decade. Never had a single issue. Until now. After what happened at the unfortunate event, Madeline continued, the community is understandably worried. You mean the illegal wedding you threw on my land? She twitched, but quickly recovered. This isn't about the past. It's about moving forward with standards. We all have to follow the rules. Ethan stepped aside, sweeping his arm toward the property. Be my guest. The inspectors didn't hesitate. They spread out across the land, taking notes, snapping photos, occasionally exchanging quiet comments. Madeline trailed behind like a mosquito in a pantsuit, pointing at things with a dramatic flair. That water trough looks rusted. That fence post leans. That goat has a mean face. Ethan followed, arms crossed, saying nothing. He knew how this game worked. Paperwork, delay, pressure. She couldn't win through brute force, so now she'd try to bury him under red tape. But what Madeline didn't realize was, Ethan had already been through wars, literal ones. She was just noise. The inspectors finally regrouped near the barn. One flipped through his notes while the other cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller," the lead inspector began, "your property is properly zoned for agricultural use. Your structures meet compliance. Livestock is healthy and well contained. We found no violations." Madeline's mouth dropped open. No. No. That can't be right. What about the smell? The noise? The second inspector gave her a flat look. "Farm animals on a farm, ma'am, are not a code violation." Her face turned scarlet. "That goose attacked someone." Ethan grinned. "Captain Snaps doesn't like trespassers." The inspectors packed up, nodded to Ethan, and returned to their truck. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving a cloud of dust and one fuming ex-HOA president standing in their wake. Madeline turned to him, fists clenched. "You think you've won?" "I wasn't aware we were keeping score," Ethan said, walking past her. But she followed, heels crunching in the gravel. "You humiliated me," she hissed. "You destroyed that wedding. Do you have any idea how much money I've lost? How many allies have turned against me?" Ethan paused and looked her dead in the eyes. "You did that to yourself. You lied, you stole, and you got caught. What happens next is on you." She glared at him, something darker creeping into her expression. "I'll make you regret this. I always finish what I start." Ethan leaned against the fence, arms resting casually. "You're only not in jail because I didn't press charges for trespassing and fraud. Maybe you should thank me instead." For the first time, she faltered. Her eyes flicked to the road like she might bolt again. But then she straightened. "You think I'm done? I'm not done. You haven't seen what I'm capable of. Karen—" "Madeline!" "Madeline," Ethan said slowly, "you've already done your worst, and I'm still standing. You want to keep coming? Fine. But know this. I'm not just defending my land. I'm defending every inch of freedom you're trying to bulldoze for your HOA kingdom." She stared at him, eyes blazing, but didn't speak. Instead, she stormed toward her car, throwing the folder into the passenger seat, slamming the door so hard the window rattled. Her tires kicked up dust as she sped away. Ethan stood there for a moment, breathing in the morning air. Then his phone buzzed again. It was a text, from someone he didn't expect. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Madeline's cracking. Thought you'd want to see it happen." Ethan stared at the screen. He wasn't part of the HOA, never wanted to be, never cared about their silly rules or lawn paint standards, but watching Madeline's house of cards collapse, yeah, that was worth showing up for. He tapped back, "I'll be there." And as the sun continued to rise over his land, Ethan smiled. The war wasn't over, but the tide was turning. The clubhouse had never felt so tense. Ethan stood quietly in the doorway, arms crossed, watching as the HOA meeting unfolded like a slow-burning wildfire. The usual polite chatter and overly rehearsed greetings were gone, replaced by glares, whispers, and an air so thick with resentment it could have been sliced with a butter knife. At the center of it all sat Madeline Stone, her back straight as a ruler, fingers gripping the armrests of her chair like they were the only things keeping her upright. Her trademark pastel blouse looked unusually wrinkled, her hair slightly frizzed, like the mask of perfection was starting to slip. She spotted Ethan standing in the back and immediately scowled, but she didn't dare address him. Not tonight. Tonight, she had bigger problems. The HOA board sat around her like a jury already halfway to a verdict. At the head of the table, Walter Crane, an older man with a shiny bald head and piercing eyes, cleared his throat and stood. "Let's get to the main issue," he said. "We all saw what happened at that wedding. And more importantly, we know who was responsible." Madeline lifted her chin. "Yes, I think we do. I believe we need to talk about Ethan Miller's complete disregard for—" Walter raised a hand, cutting her off. "Karen, it's Madeline." "Karen," he repeated firmly. "This isn't about Ethan. He's not part of this HOA. Never has been. What happened is on you." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Madeline's eyes darted nervously to her former allies. Several avoided her gaze. One woman near the front rolled her eyes. "I acted for the good of the community," Madeline argued. "That wedding brought us visibility, prestige." It brought us lawsuits, snapped Debbie, a board member and local attorney. You lied to everyone. You said Ethan had agreed. You stole that venue. You took money. Madeline's jaw clenched. It wasn't stealing. It was a temporary arrangement. I had reason to believe. Save it, Debbie shot back. We've all seen the receipts. Thousands of dollars collected through the HOA under your direction. You misused funds, manipulated records, and nearly dragged us all down with you. Madeline looked around the room, her voice trembling now. I built this HOA. I kept it running. Without me, it'll fall apart. Maybe it should, muttered someone in the back. Ethan allowed himself a small smirk. Another board member, a soft-spoken man named Jeffrey, stood up with a small stack of papers in hand. There's been talk, he said. Serious talk, about a vote. Madeline went still. A vote? She repeated. Walter nodded solemnly. To remove you as HOA president, effective immediately. Madeline's eyes widened. You can't do that. We can, and we will. She stood so abruptly her chair screeched across the floor. I've given years to this neighborhood. I've sacrificed. You abused your position, Debbie cut in. You created ridiculous rules, fined people over garden gnomes and mailbox colors. You turned this place into a dictatorship, and now you've broken the law. Madeline's lips quivered. This is a witch hunt. He's behind it. She pointed toward Ethan, her voice rising with desperation. This man has been undermining me for years. He embarrassed me, sabotaged that wedding. Ethan stepped forward at last, calm and unbothered. Did I tell you to organize a wedding on land you didn't own? Did I tell you to lie to everyone in this room? No, Karen. You did that all by yourself. The room was dead silent. Walter exhaled and looked around. Let's vote. One by one, hands went up. Debbie, Jeffrey, Walter, even the quiet ones, all except Madeline. She stood frozen, watching as her empire, her HOA kingdom, crumbled right in front of her. No one defended her. No one voted to keep her. It was unanimous. Walter spoke again, gentle but firm. You have 1 week to vacate your position. After that, we'll elect a new president. Madeline's breath hitched. Her eyes glazed over as if trying to process it all. She turned to Ethan one last time, eyes burning. This is your fault. He tilted his head. I just exposed the truth. You did the rest. Without another word, Madeline grabbed her purse, her dignity leaking out with every step, and stormed toward the door. She shoved it open so hard it bounced off the wall, leaving behind a final, hollow echo. Then she was gone. The silence hung in the room like a held breath. And then, applause. Light at first, then louder. The room didn't cheer for Ethan necessarily. It cheered for the end of tyranny, for relief, for the chance to breathe again. Ethan just smiled to himself. As he turned to leave, Walter called out, Ethan. He paused. Yeah? Thanks. Ethan shrugged. Don't thank me. He walked out into the cool evening air, the stars blinking overhead like old friends. Thank the cows. 3 days had passed since Madeline Stone's fall from grace, and the farm had never felt quieter. The morning mist hung low over the fields, softening the outlines of the barn, the fence posts, and the still muddy footprints left by that unforgettable wedding. Ethan sat on his porch, coffee in hand, the creaking of his rocking chair syncing with the distant clucks and moos of animals returning to their normal routines. Peace, it seemed, had finally returned. But then he saw the car, a sleek black sedan pulling up just outside his gate. Ethan set his mug down slowly and stood. The driver's door opened, and out stepped someone he hadn't expected to see again. Ashley, the bride. Gone was the perfect hair and camera-ready smile. She looked more real now. Jeans, a simple blouse, sneakers instead of heels. Her eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment, both just stood there in silence. Didn't think I'd see you again, Ethan said. I wasn't sure if I should come, she admitted, walking up the path. But I figured you deserved something. He raised an eyebrow. Apology? That, and a check. She reached into her purse and handed him an envelope. Ethan opened it and found a neatly written note, and a bank check made out to him. "For the damage," Ashley said. "The destroyed grass, the broken fence, the cake embedded in your barn door." Ethan gave a half smile. Didn't think the cake would stick that high. Impressive, really. Ashley laughed quietly. It was the kind of laugh people make when they're finally breathing again after a storm. "I didn't know Madeline had lied about getting your permission. I swear," she said. "We were told this was a legitimate venue, that you were grumpy but agreeable." "Grumpy I'll give you," Ethan said. "Agreeable? That was generous." Her smile faded a little. "I'm sorry, for everything. I wish I had asked questions sooner." "Most people don't," he replied. "They just trust the loudest person in the room." She nodded, ashamed. "My dad's suing Madeline. He's furious. Says this wedding was the most expensive disaster we've ever thrown." Ethan folded the check into his back pocket. "Good. She earned it." Ashley took a breath, then turned toward her car. "Well, I won't bother you any longer." "Ashley," Ethan called after her. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry too." She looked surprised. "For what?" "That your wedding day turned into a war zone," she chuckled. "Honestly, I think I married the wrong guy anyway." "You figured that out fast." "Goose attacks tend to clarify things," she smirked. She waved and drove off, tires kicking up dust along the gravel road. Ethan watched her go, then turned back toward the porch. From the barn, Captain Snaps waddled out like a conquering hero, fluffing his feathers with an indignant honk, as if asking, "Are we done fighting tyrants for the week?" Ethan grinned. "You and me both, soldier." He knelt beside the goose and gave him a firm pat on the back. The bird let out a proud, echoing squawk that could have been mistaken for a war cry. Later that evening, as the sun melted behind the horizon and the sky blazed with streaks of gold and purple, Ethan stood near the fence line, looking out at his land. Not perfect, but his. He thought about Madeline, how far she'd gone to control what didn't belong to her, how she had wrapped her power in layers of community and order until people forgot they had a say. And yet, in the end, her own lies had undone her. He took a deep breath. Then he spoke. Not loudly, but with certainty. Like he was saying it to the wind, or maybe to the people who still needed to hear it. Freedom isn't something people hand you. It's something you defend, inch by inch, even when it looks ridiculous, even when it means unleashing a goose on a wedding guest. A pause. Because the moment you stop standing up for what's yours, someone like her shows up to take it. Behind him, the animals settled in for the night. A cow let out a low, satisfied moo. A goat sneezed somewhere inside the barn. Captain Snaps, ever vigilant, hopped onto a fence post and looked out over the yard like a sentry guarding his kingdom. And Ethan? He just smiled. Because for now, the land was safe. And so was the message. True freedom isn't loud, it's quiet. It looks like standing your ground, even when no one else believes you should. And sometimes, it comes with feathers. Ethan stood by the fence post as twilight settled over his land, the golden haze casting long shadows over the barn, the pond, and the dirt driveway that had once hosted chaos in the shape of chiffon, champagne, and a goose named Captain Snaps. Everything was still, but not silent, because in that stillness there was clarity, truth, the kind that only arrives after the storm passes and leaves behind wreckage, but also wisdom. Madeline Stone was gone. Her reign of artificial rules, HOA tyranny, and self-righteous speeches had ended not with applause, but with muttered disgust and legal documents. Her downfall hadn't been orchestrated with revenge, or violence, or even strategy. It had been simple. A man stood up for what was his, and that made all the difference. Ethan had never asked for a fight. He didn't enjoy confrontation. All he wanted was space. Peace, autonomy, a small patch of earth to call his own, earned through sweat, guarded with patience. But when someone tried to take that from him, not with guns, but with clipboards and fake smiles, he had a choice: bend or defend. And he chose to defend. But here's what most people forget. Defense doesn't always look like fists. Sometimes it looks like cows, or goats, or a goose with a vendetta. Sometimes it looks like laughter in the face of arrogance, or calm defiance in front of a crowd that doubts you. Because at the end of the day, power, real power, isn't in titles, it's in truth. So, what can we take from this? What does a rogue wedding, a petty HOA president, and one very determined farmer have to do with the lives we live today? More than you'd think. Today, we live in a world that's louder than ever. Everyone's got an opinion, a rule, a voice shouting, "This is how it should be," and too often we hand over our control to systems, to peer pressure, to false authority, just to keep the peace. We let someone else make decisions about our time, our values, even our space, because they say it's for the greater good. But here's the truth. Your boundaries matter. Your voice matters. And no one gets to redefine your worth without your consent. Ethan didn't become a hero because he fought back. He became one because he reminded everyone around him that respect is not a community perk. It's a basic human right. You don't need to raise a barn or herd livestock to understand that lesson. Maybe for you, the Madeline in your life isn't a power-hungry neighbor. It's a toxic boss, a broken system, or a voice in your own head telling you you're not allowed to say no. But you are. You always are. There's something poetic about the way things ended on that farm. A woman who thought she could control a neighborhood lost control of everything. A wedding built on deception crumbled under the hooves of truth. And a man who just wanted to drink his coffee in peace became the symbol of quiet rebellion. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't viral, but it was real. And sometimes, real is enough. Ethan never sought the spotlight. But whether he liked it or not, his story lit a spark in a place where people had grown used to keeping their heads down. His stand reminded them that no matter how small you feel, you're never powerless, so long as you're willing to stand your ground. That's the kind of story we need more of. Not perfect people, not loud speeches, but honest courage in the face of casual control. The kind of courage that says, "This land is mine. This life is mine. And if you want to take it from me, you'd better bring more than paperwork." As Ethan sat down that evening, feet up on the porch rail, Captain Snaps waddled beside him and settled like a sentry keeping watch over the fading sunlight. The farm was quiet again, but not because it surrendered, because it endured. And that's the real lesson here. Freedom isn't something you win once. It's something you protect. Every day, in small, stubborn ways. In how you speak. In what you allow. In what you walk away from. And what you stand up for. So now, let me ask you something. What would you do if someone like Madeline tried to take your space, your voice, your freedom? Would you roll over? Or would you let your inner goose fly? Yeah, maybe it sounds ridiculous. But the truth is, courage looks different on everyone. For Ethan, it looked like livestock and quiet resolve. For you, it might be saying no to something you've tolerated too long. It might be speaking up when others stay silent, or standing still while the world demands that you move. Whatever your version looks like, own it. Because stories like this one don't just happen in dusty farms. They happen everywhere. In cities, suburbs, offices, online, in hearts. And the next time they try to tell you it's just one day, remember Ethan. Remember the cows. And remember that freedom never asks for permission. If this story moved you, inspired you, or just made you want to unleash your inner goose, subscribe to the Story Forge, hit that bell, share your thoughts. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Have you ever stood your ground when no one else did? Let's talk, let's grow, and above all, let's keep forging stories that matter. See you in the next tale.